or comments or anything. Yes, Gus.
So, with Psalm 46,
Yes.
the 46th word in and then the 92nd word in, right?
No, 46 words from the start, and then you count backwards from the end, and it's
okay.
46 words in from the end.
Okay.
46, 46.
Who noticed that?
Yeah, I've no idea. Somebody has got too much time on his hands, clearly. Yeah. I know about it because David Allen White points it out in one of his talks.
He's dead now, so we can't ask him.
Well, this is it. Yeah. I think he says he doesn't know who discovered it first of all. But yeah, fascinating, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know what are the odds that that's a coincidence. The thing about, I've shown everybody here a sampling of what there is. There is plenty more where that came from. What I did, I think, when I sort of did this with the Lower Sixth a year ago, is we actually looked a bit at one of the play. I think I looked at Hamlet with them. The ghost's speech in Hamlet is worth looking at. Like I say, it complains about the fact that it died unanointed, unannealed, unshrivened. There's a bit where Hamlet is going to kill the king in revenge for the murder of his father, and all the circumstances are ideal. He's got his back to him, he's vulnerable, there's nobody around to witness it, etc. And at the last minute he notices that he's saying his evening prayers. And he says, I can't do it. He's literally probably just made an act of contrition or something. If I kill him now, I'll be sending him straight to heaven. How is that revenge? So he doesn't do it. But you see, there's all these themes right the way through Shakespeare, which I don't think you get in other authors, and certainly a modern secular author, it wouldn't be at the forefront of his mind. They can't deal with it. It's meaningless to a lot of people today. And I think actually Shakespeare, maybe we're coming to the point where he's going to start fading a little bit from the sort of national discourse. He's kept alive, really, two ways. There were lots of films of Shakespeare plays made. Actors, I think, like to be able to say that they've played a Shakespeare character. But these films, particularly in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot of Shakespeare films made, and a lot of them are very good, actually, and worth seeing. They were very popular, and a lot of them, the Hollywood ones, were really, box office hits. So that sort of kept it alive. Somebody mentioned earlier on when we were having lunch the Romeo and Juliet. David Allen White said, and I think I agree with him, that the Leonardo DiCaprio one, which is one of these ones that's given a modern setting, it's like Florida and the parents are drugs barons and they don't have swords, they have guns and all of that kind of thing. But there's a bit at the end where Juliet wakes up from her sleep and sees that Romeo is dead, and she gets a gun and blows her brains out, and it's a horrible ending. And David Allen White says that's the best bit of the film. Horrible as it is, actually that's completely appropriate, because people have this idea that Romeo and Juliet is a sort of sentimental tearjerker, and it's really not, because the two characters commit suicide. To an Elizabethan audience would have known exactly what that means. They've now sent themselves to hell for all eternity. It's a horrifying ending. And actually, he says the director there couldn't get the theological horror back in, but he did get a measure of the horror back into the ending of the play. So he says, I think that's a completely appropriate ending for which I see his point there. But these film versions kept Shakespeare alive. Also, it has to be studied in school still. But I really wonder, there are schools all over the country where you have teachers teaching Shakespeare and they really don't have any understanding or appreciation of him themselves. So you can't give what you don't have. How are you meant to teach something that you yourself don't understand? And most teachers are lazy anyway. Spoiler alert, they are. The key to understanding the mentality of most teachers is they want to do minimum work for maximum pay. That's basically it. Okay, if you have to teach Shakespeare, it's very tempting to just go into W.H. Smith, buy one of the many, many commentaries or whatever, notes off the shelf, and just, there you go, you're teaching from that. But you don't really understand it. You're just giving somebody else's notes. You're just going by what someone else says. If you have no real love of it and no real understanding on the inside of it, how are you going to communicate that yourself. So, and the teachers themselves today in schools were, of course, they were taught Shakespeare in school by teachers who probably didn't really understand it either. So it's a sort of self-perpetuating thing. Unfortunately, that's where we're at now. Yeah. Yes.
In answer to your question about the eagle,
Yes.
sympathetic, it seems that possibly is a reference to William Byrd. And my question was going to be about, do we know anything else about Byrd and Talus's?
Of course, Byrd was at the court, wasn't he? Was he? Yes, yes.
Greek Catholics involved in the arts.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. Thank you very much. Yes, you're quite right. William Byrd, one of the questions that people sometimes raise with Shakespeare is, okay, he was a Catholic, but he kept it under wraps. But he was at the court of Elizabeth, he was at the court of King James. How did he get away with it? It's a well-known fact that Elizabeth I had a bit of a soft spot for artists. I think William Byrd, somebody grassed him up, and she said, oh yes, but he's a musician. Like, that somehow doesn't count, okay? So yeah, he was at the court, wasn't he? Huh, that would make sense. So the eagle-feathered king.
Then who's the bird of loudest lay?
Well, I don't see why it couldn't be the two of them. The bird of loudest lay, herald and trumpet. Yeah, I mean, the one that everybody hears, right? Because he's the loudest. I don't know. I honestly, what I showed you there, I think I only unpacked maybe 10% of that. You can just tell there's depths in there. There's most of it I don't understand. Yeah. But yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yes.
So at the end of the poem, he says, "Sigh a prayer for these dead birds," which no Protestant would say.
Yeah.
But it seems a bit of an edgy thing to include. It seems a bit too obvious.
Well, it does to you and I, yes, because we can see it, but it's birds. You see, it's make-believe, so therefore it's okay. Remember the bit I read for you from Southall? If you turn it into a nice fairy story, suddenly it's not real anymore. And if it's not real, it's not a threat to anyone, you see? That's really what's going on, I think.
There's a possible cross-reference there with sonnet 43, where he describes it's autumn. And he says, "Bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang." Which
Really?
is referring to the ruins of the monasteries.
Of the monasteries, bare ruined choirs, yes.
The sweet birds.
Well. Yeah, almost certainly, yeah. That sounds plausible to me, yes. Yes. Yeah. Oh my goodness me, there's... I wonder whether it would be worth just reading bits. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Because it's a whole thing we'd have to undertake. But it's worth just reading... Well, I was going to say just reading Shakespeare. There's always going to be a ton of stuff in there that you don't understand if you ever read a Shakespeare play. First of all, remember, it wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be performed. Okay? But also... Again, I lean on David Allen White. He said this in his wisdom. He said, I mean, I think he retired just before he came here to London in 2009. He had been for years and years the professor of English literature at the United States Naval Academy. So it turns out that to be an officer in the US Navy or an officer in the US Marine Corps, you have to study Shakespeare and a whole load of other stuff as well. I guess. It's the equivalent of Sandhurst or something like that. But he was the guy who taught English literature. So he used to teach them Shakespeare. And he said, look, I tell my students, just keep reading, don't worry about it. He said, there's stuff that I don't understand after 50 years or whatever. I come across bits and what on earth is he on about here? I haven't got a clue. Just keep reading. And then very often the big picture sort of begins to emerge. But I think maybe just reading Shakespeare on its own is maybe even a bit too heavy going to begin with. Maybe, yeah, but I would encourage you definitely, all of you, something like Joseph Pearce, if you can get hold of him, very good kind of entry level. Hugh Ross Williamson is just brilliant. I can't get over it. There's so much in here where I could just read you large sections of the... He ends with a whole thing about Oliver Cromwell. Did anybody realise that there was a link between Oliver Cromwell and Shakespeare? Apparently, they went to Cambridge. Oliver Cromwell would have been a boy, and it was the last time, it's not that long before Shakespeare died, I think it was the last time Shakespeare's troupe came and acted in Cambridge. Also, around about that time, there's a story that the little boy Oliver Cromwell is visited by James I, and so the little boy, future Charles I, is playing, with little Oliver Cromwell, and they get in a fight. And little Oliver Cromwell punches little Charles I on the nose and makes his nose bleed. Anyway, So, but there's just stuff in there that's really, really extraordinary.
Time for that extract you mentioned earlier.
Oh, of course, yeah. Let me. That's one of the bits I can put my hand on without having to look too far for it. Here we go. Mary, Queen of Scots. Yeah.
Remember, but you said there wasn't time for something else.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Here we go. The evening before the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, she asked to be allowed the consolation of her own chaplain. This was refused, although he was in the castle. Refused by one of the commissioners for the execution, the Earl of Kent, a convinced and fiery Anglican. He told the Queen that, quote, her life would have been the death, as her death would be the life of English Protestantism. Compare to Southwell's poem, Deceased Release. That her life is her death, and her death is her life. She was sufficiently impressed by this to say at supper to her physician Burgoyne, quote, here comes the truth at last. They told me I was to die because I had plotted against the Queen, but then arrives this Kent, whom they sent hither to convert me. And what says he? I am to die for my religion. Unquote. Mary, however, had one consolation in death. Anticipating the probable situation, the Pope had sent her a consecrated host, which she kept in a gold ciborium, probably a pyx actually, but yeah. Kept in a gold ciborium, that if a priest were denied her, she might administer the Blessed Sacrament to herself. Thus fortified, she faced the scaffold. After the commission for her execution had been read, to which she listened, quote, with as small regard as if it had not concerned her at all, and with as cheerful a countenance as if it had been a pardon, unquote, the Dean of Peterborough started to preach a sermon to her. She interrupted him with, Mr. Dean, I am settled in the ancient Catholic Roman religion, and mind to spend my blood in defence of it. The Dean said, continues the eyewitness account, change your opinion, and repent you of your former wickedness, and settle your faith only in Jesus Christ, by him to be saved. Then she answered again and again, Mr. Dean, trouble not yourself any more, for I am settled and resolved in this my religion, and am purposed therein to die. Then the Earl of Shrewsbury and the Earl of Kent, perceiving her so obstinate, told her that since she would not hear the exhortation begun by the Dean, quote, we will pray for your grace that you may have your heart lightened even at this last hour with the true knowledge of God, and so die therein. Then she answered, quote, if you will pray for me, my lords, I will thank you, but to join in prayer with you I will not, for that you and I are not of one religion. The English martyrs were not ecumenical at all, by the way. Saint Margaret Clitheroe was crushed to death, I think, between... there was an Anglican worthy at her side as she was dying, and she rebuked him and said, I won't say amen to your prayer, and you won't say amen to mine, because it's not the same religion. Anyway, sorry. Then the Lords called for Mr. Dean, the Dean of Peterborough, who, kneeling on the scaffold stairs, began this prayer, O most gracious God and merciful Father, etc. All the assembly saying... saving the Queen of Scots and her servants, saying after him. During the saying of which prayer, the Queen of Scots, sitting upon a stool and having about her neck an Agnus Dei, in her hand a crucifix, at her girdle a pair of beads with a golden cross at the end of them, a Latin book in her hand, began with tears and loud and fast voice to pray in Latin, and in the midst of her prayers she slided off from her stool, and kneeling said diverse Latin prayers. An Agnus Dei is a wax image of the Lamb. It's worn sort of around the neck on a string or on a chain, and I think the Pope would bless them on the Wednesday of Holy Week. So it's a sacramental. It's a bit like a scapula, but I think you wear it on the outside. The Rosary, the Book of Prayers in Latin, I have seen. It's at Stonyhurst College, and in the days when I was there, I think nowadays they have a proper museum and everything is in a glass case. When I was there in the 90s, it was just sort of, if you spoke to some old Jesuit there, he'd show it you and it would be in a drawer somewhere. It was wonderful. I mean, it's kind of scary, but it was wonderful as well at the time. Mary, Queen of Scots' Book of Hours, she said the office. So she's praying in Latin on her knees. And at the end of the Dean's prayer, she, kneeling, prayed in English to this effect, quote, "For Christ, his afflicted church, and for an end to their troubles, for her Son, and for the Queen's majesty, that she might prosper and serve God aright," unquote. She confessed that she hoped to be saved, quote, "by and in the blood of Christ, at the foot of whose crucifix she would shed her blood," unquote. Then said the Earl of Kent, "Madam, settle Christ Jesus in your heart and leave those trumperies." Then she, little regarding or nothing at all, went forward with her prayers, desiring that, quote, "God avert his wrath from this island, and that he would give her grief and forgiveness of her sins." These, with other prayers she made in English, saying she forgave her enemies with all her heart, that had long sought her blood, and desired God to convert them to the truth. And in the end of the prayer, she desired all saints to make intercession for her to Jesus Christ, and so, kissing the crucifix, and crossing of her also, said these words, quote, "Even as thy arms, O Jesus, were spread here upon the cross, so receive me into thy arms of mercy, and forgive me all my sins," unquote. And then he goes on and talks about Fletcher, the Dean of Peterborough. I did, I don't think I pointed it out. Is the thing still on? No, it's off now. On the that was the tomb of Mary, Queen of Scots on one of the pictures. Some of you might have recognised it. It's in Westminster Abbey. It's about the one thing that's worth seeing in there, to be honest. It used to be the case. We did this in 2008, didn't we? You could tell them if you went to the west door, "I'm just here to pray at the tomb of Mary, Queen of Scots." They'd let you in for free. And they would escort you, like, to make sure you didn't go anywhere else, and you could sort of kneel down and pray there, and then they'd escort you out again. I don't think they allow you to do that anymore.
Well, I went there the other day with some American friends.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to see it, and we realised there were no tickets for that day. So then
Yeah.
I thought, oh, they probably have a place for private prayer. So I asked them when we went in, and they have a line of chairs in the back corner,
Yeah.
and they make you sit there. And then one of the women who walked past said to us, "Oh, we'll just stay there, just so we can keep an eye on you." And you wonder, is this a church for praying in, or is this a place for the bloody foreign tourists?
Oh, the latter, very much so. Very much the latter. There's a wonderful throwaway line by G.K. Chesterton where he said, I wish I could remember it word for word because it's just so great. He says that Westminster Abbey it's a warehouse for collecting some of the more tasteless examples of 17th century statuary, which is exactly what it is. It's absolutely cluttered to the rafters with these marble busts of very smug-looking Protestant worthies in their big ruffs. And but there's a poet's corner. And you've got, Handel and Purcell and all sorts of, people who were communists and sodomites and didn't believe in God are all buried there. W.H. Auden and all of these people, Benjamin Britten and I don't know who else. Guess who's not buried there? I think there's even a statue of him, but he's not buried there. If you're going to have a poet's corner, who's the greatest English poet? Shakespeare, to this day, is buried in, does anybody know? Stratford-on-Avon, in the local church. And on his tomb is this curious little bit of verse, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig the dust, enclose it here. Blessed be the man who spares these stones, but cursed be he who moves my bones." And to this day, Nobody has dug up his grave. It has been untouched. Now here's an interesting question. Why would Shakespeare be so keen to make sure that his grave when he dies is unopened and untouched? Why even put a curse on it? He doesn't want anybody opening his tomb after he's died. Well, if he died a Catholic, then he probably would have been buried with a crucifix, a rosary, something like that. And of course it wouldn't have, he's dead at that point, but it would have caused problems for his family, for his children and grandchildren and all the rest of it. Okay? There's a local vicar, I think that actually the Protestant vicar of Stratford, I think, this is after Shakespeare's death, wrote a letter to somebody in a nearby town, and he says in that letter in disgust, Master Shakespeare died a papist. So I think it's pretty clear he did. For me anyway, I think that's, the curse on the tomb is fairly conclusive. It hasn't been disturbed. Again, I'm leaning on David Allen White, who used to tell this story quite often about a mad lady from America called Celia Bacon, who was the origin of the Shakespeare was really XYZ. She was convinced that Shakespeare was really her ancestor, Sir Francis Bacon. Well, Sir Francis Bacon wasn't really her ancestor. They just happened to have the same name, so there's that. Also, Sir Francis Bacon was not Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was not Sir Francis Bacon. But she went over from America, this is in about 1800 or 1790 something. She went over to Stratford and broke in at night with pickaxes and lanterns to try and dig him up, and they arrested her. But I think she is the first one to claim Shakespeare wasn't really Shakespeare. Now, of course, the possible candidates for him have multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. Any sensible person, and particularly a Catholic, David Allen White says this, Hugh Ross Williamson says this, Joe Pearce says this. Anyone with any common sense knows Shakespeare, number one, was only one person. Number two, he was a man called William Shakespeare. Okay, who wrote Shakespeare? Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare. That's it. There's no mystery to it. Yes, he really existed, and yes, he was only one person. But it's Sir Francis Bacon. Oh no, it's really Queen Elizabeth I who wrote it in secret. It's Christopher Marlowe, even though he died in a duel. No, he died in a tavern brawl in about the 1590s. But no, he didn't really die. He got better and secretly went and lived in Italy and sent the plays over from Italy. Okay. Do you notice, by the way, otherwise very respectable kind of normie liberals who hate conspiracy theories are quite partial to conspiracy theories if it's the right sort, and if it completely defies common sense, and if it undermines any idea, any danger that it might turn out Shakespeare was a Catholic. One of my favourites, the Earl of Oxford, really wrote Shakespeare. The Earl of Oxford, as David Allen White puts it, the Earl of Oxford wrote poetry under his own name, which stinks. But supposedly, whenever he wrote under the name William Shakespeare, it was amazing. But it's nonsense. And there was a famous example of somebody, I think in the 90s, who got his PhD thesis with the thesis that Shakespeare was really a Muslim. So yeah, so when these guys say Shakespeare was black, like I say, that's honestly not the wackiest idea out there. There was a book published about 20 years ago that said Shakespeare was sort of a consortium of 20 different guys. Yeah, come on.
Could he have been black and Muslim?
I think actually he was an albino midget in a wheelchair. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Any more
With
questions?
15 people living in his head.
Well, in that case, please a round of applause for each.